as a result, I'm now sitting in a boiling hot room with my trusty fan off to make this recording, and I'm more or less naked and absolutely drenched in sweat.
A delightful image.
We went to purchase some fans, some electric fans.
Mm-hmm.
We bought 2 at a local sort of everything shop.
Yeah.
And we thought, we'll just get 2 for the moment, and if we need more, we'll come back tomorrow and get more. And sure enough, we went back the next day to buy another one. There was none, like completely sold out.
They're all gone.
Completely gone. And I asked the guy in the shop, and he said, you won't find an electric fan anywhere in Stockholm for sale right now. It's a citywide, it's a shortage of electric fans.
Have you not got any manual fans from Japan?
I don't. I used to swear by them. Like I used to love them, and they used to be my sort of all-purpose work accessory. And I was never seen without my trusty folding fan. But they all, they tend to break. Obviously, I mean they don't last for very long if you use them very frequently. And I actually don't have one on me at the moment.
Oh wow! I brought over 4 with me when we moved here. One of which was a souvenir from the Gion Matsuri, because in the last year that I was in Japan, at Gion Matsuri, as you know, but perhaps not everyone listening does, they have these large floats which get dragged around the city, and in front of them are all the people dragging them, or in some cases they're holding them on their shoulders. And then in front of that you'll have a couple of people holding these metal rods which they drag along the ground, which makes a kind of scrapey sound.
Right.
And then they hit it twice on the ground, and then they start dragging it again. And that's the way that they traverse the city.
Seems sort of like some kind of gangland tactic, doesn't it?
It's not the image I had.
Have you seen the movie The Warriors?
No.
You haven't?
No, I haven't.
You haven't seen The Warriors?
Never even heard of it.
Oh, Danny. Okay, that's the topic that we're going to be talking about after this.
Right. Well, anyway, just before I left Japan, a couple of months before I left Japan, I actually participated in the Gion Matsuri. I was one of those people standing at the front, dragging the metal rod along the ground and then hitting it on the floor.
Right.
And as a sort of souvenir of that day, I was given a fan with the markings for the particular yama it was. They've got yamas and hokos, but the float that I was carrying, I was one of the carriers of. So I have that fan and a couple more, and I use them every episode. The only reason you can't hear them is because I edit I fan myself while you're talking, and then I edit all the noises you get in the microphone out later.
The secret is out. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's a little bit behind the curtain for you.
So that's how you do it. Okay, that's interesting because I never hear it when we record. But that's just testimony to your covert fanning skills. I am
known for my elite covert fanning skills.
So this movie, The Warriors, you must see it, Danny. It's a 1979 action movie.
I had a feeling it might be.
It's achieved somewhat of a sort of cult status. I'm actually surprised that you don't know of it. Basically, it's a movie about the late 70s gangland gangs in New York City. And it goes along the storyline of a novel by the same name called The Warriors, and it stars probably the only connection between The Warriors and sort of mainstream blockbuster Hollywood is the star of the film. The main protagonist is played by Michael Beck, who is sort of the poster boy of the late 70s and 80s. You might remember a movie called Xanadu.
Ah, yes.
So Michael Beck was also in that, as well as a number of other sort of teenage movies in the late 70s and 80s. Anyway, it's a great movie. It's hard to describe what's good about it. It's a sort of it has an art house feel to it, so it feels very low budget, but it's very gritty. It's quite violent, but it really, I guess, and the storyline is really, really simple. It's hard to really spoil it. Basically, it's all about a slightly exaggerated slightly fictionalized version of New York City and all the gangs around the city who have the different territories, and there's, gang warfare and all of that. And basically one of the leaders of one of the gangs called Cyrus decides to get all the gangs together, call a truce, and unite all of the gangs to create this sort of big, massive, guerrilla
Uber gang
force that could overrun the city, basically. And as a prank, one of the leaders of one of the gangs kills Cyrus during this meeting, and then frames...
Classic prank.
That's right.
Bit of murder.
That's right. Everybody
always gets them.
Everybody was chuckling. And basically frames the killing on another gang called the Warriors. And the whole movie is basically about the Warriors getting back to their home turf. And that's it.
Oh, interesting. So I see on Wikipedia that the novel of the same name, The Warriors, is actually based on Xenophon's Anabasis. So it appeals to my classical interests as well.
There you go.
Wow.
You should see it. It is difficult to define what's sort of captivating about it. Like there's nothing really particularly special about it, to be honest. It's a sort of it's a straight action movie from the late 70s. And so it sounds like that, like the music is great, and it looks like that. The costume design, again, also, much like the setting, is kind of like a slightly exaggerated version of, again, late 70s gangland in United States. But for some reason, this movie has achieved this cult status, and there are many sort of cultural references to many of the lines in the movie, and there's just something about it that's kind of captivating somehow. And
all right.
Yeah, so be sure to watch it and let me know what you think.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to put that on my list.
So a little bit of your excellent influence has rubbed off on me, and I've actually started doing a Swedish course using an app.
Oh, cool. Interesting. Actually, I've been using a new app recently as well, so sounds like the perfect time to talk about apps.
That's right. So previously we've talked about this, I think, 2 or 3 times before, but just to recap quickly, the ones that you have been using are one is called Anka, is that right?
Anki. It's a Japanese word. It means memory.
Okay. Sorry, Anka means duck in Swedish. I learned that the other day. Excellent.
Oh, well, very, very impressive. So, Japanese for memory, Swedish for duck. He could have gone with either of those names, really, for his software to remember things.
Right. Anyway, so the other one that you were using was Memrise?
So that's the one I've started using recently.
Okay.
I don't think we've mentioned it on the show. We might have, but the other main one I was using when we spoke before was Hello Talk, which is a bit of a different sort of category of apps.
That's right. So I've been using 2, and I wanted to tell you about them and also recommend them because they've been very good. For what they set out to do, they've been very good, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the 2 that I've been using is actually made by the same company, and that's DuoLingo, and the DuoLingo's sort of companion flashcard app that goes along with it called Tiny Cards.
So DuoLingo is just the web app, is it? It's the website and the in-browser version, and Tiny Cards is the mobile app client to that. Is that right?
No, they're both actually standalone mobile clients that also have a web interface.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So my perception of them was a little different then. So what's the difference?
So the approach with DuoLingo is basically all about translation. So it's centered around translation of phrases.
Right.
And I found it actually to be excellent. As a little bit of context, I was actually an English teacher for, 7 years? 8 years in Japan when I first got there. And so I'm fairly critical of the way that, educational curriculums are put together. Sorry, curricula. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
I was an English teacher. Clearly not anymore.
Not a Latin teacher, so...
No, that's right. So that's fine. I'm safe. I'm good. Anyway, it's created very, very cleverly. It's very gradual. But the way that it teaches grammar is through translation into your native language.
Right.
So you are presented with, a sentence in the language that you're learning, in my case, Swedish, and, each one of the words will be underlined, and you press on the underlined word and it will say it. You get a recording all of these words and give you a little sort of pop-up that shows you what it means. So when you first start using it, it doesn't give you any foundation in the language's grammar beyond that. Just
right.
Here is a simple sentence. Press the words to find out what they mean. So you sort of do that, and as that'll be the first sort of task to do in the lesson. And then after that, you're basically tested with very simple translation exercises. A lot of them are sort of fill in the blanks, so you have some options, and you just sort of press the word that you think is the right answer to go in the right order to translate something.
Right.
And as you continue on, you get more challenging translation exercises, for example, where you actually have to write out the whole sentence yourself, as opposed to just sort of choosing the words that slot into the right place. What is interesting about DuoLingo is that it's formatted very much like a free-to-play mobile game.
Right.
So it's free, and as you play it, you'll have ads that pop up, and you have experience points that you gain for completing lessons. And you also have these gems that you get for getting answers correct and completing sections of the curriculum. And the interesting thing is that when you make a mistake, you have life, which has like 5 bars in it. And when you make a mistake, you lose one of those bars. Now, every day, your life meter recharges itself. If you're making lots of mistakes and you've lost all of your lives, then you go to a different section of the app to practice, and you do like a set of questions, and that will restore 1 bar of life. So, yeah, it's exactly like a free-to-play game. And the other thing, of course, you can do is purchase life using your gems. And if you don't have enough gems from completing enough lessons, you, of course, can buy gems with in-app purchases. So it's exactly like a mobile game.
Right.
What I've found has been really good, though, is that that particular model for free-to-play really works well in this context.
Oh, yeah?
Because, unlike a game where you're just sort of doing it because it's enjoyable and because it's fun, or you're just looking to kill time, or you like the game for some other reason, in this specific case, the whole idea of grinding, which for those who are unfamiliar with gaming vocabulary, the word grinding generally refers to somewhat mundane repetition of a certain action in a game to gain points or to gain credits or some kind of advantage for yourself. You're just sort of doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Right. And eventually you get enough points, and that allows you to advance in some way in the game or get some ability or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's called grinding. So in the context of a language learning app, grinding is very, very effective in helping you learn, because you're just doing the same thing over and over and again to remember something. So there's never a point. And the other nice thing is, of course, when you see ads, and you'll see like video ads, and you'll see, static image ads for other apps or other websites or things like that. In the case of DuoLingo, it's timed really nicely such that it feels like kind of a break.
Right.
So I might just watch this video for this game and just sort of have a little bit of a break here for a moment before I get back into the study. So all of these things just make it really, really sort of fun and low friction to use on an everyday basis. And naturally, you get things like, if you use it 10 days in a row, you get a special achievement. And if you can buy, with your gems, you can buy things like you can buy a day, so that, for example, if you need to miss doing it for a day, you could buy an extra day so that you can, keep your continuous streak. And it's full of like the usual sort of achievements and the other good thing, there's 2 other good things to mention about it. You can connect with other people who are using the app and kind of keep a leaderboard just between you and the other person.
Yeah.
And that's really great, because I'm doing that with my wife, and so I can see, how far she's gotten through and what her points are compared to mine. And the final thing that's really good about it is it also has some of the social features similar to Hello Talk.
Oh, really?
It does. So what happens is there's a section of the app where it says "Find me a club," and you click that, and basically, you press that, and basically it will find you. It's kind of like a chat room. I'm not sure the total amount of users that are in each one. I think it's about 10 to 15. And it finds you other people who are on the same level as you in the language that you're learning.
Oh, okay. So it's connecting you with other people who are learning your language as opposed to native speakers of the language.
Right. So that's the key difference with this and HelloTalk.
Right.
However, the thing that's neat is that it's not just a chat room where you can just write stuff. Inside this small little club that you create, that it finds for you, will be various activities that you can do with the other people in there.
Interesting.
For example, caption this, and somebody will post a photo, and then you need to write a caption for it, and people can comment on your caption or whatever.
Interesting. Giving you a bit of that sort of classroom environment feel.
Exactly. So the only thing that it doesn't do very well is teach you how to speak. But obviously, that's, without actually a native speaker on hand, that's actually kind of an ambitious function for something like this to have.
Yeah.
So that's DuoLingo. I'll get on to Tiny Cards in a moment. But what are the apps that you're using? You mentioned that you're using a new one.
Actually, before I go on to that, I had a question about DuoLingo.
Okay.
Because an interesting that all sounds very interesting, and it has a lot in common with Memrise, although the business model is a little bit different, which I'll go on to in a little bit. But with DuoLingo, it sounds as if the free-to-play model does make a lot of sense, but it sounds as if a lot of the time, the things you would pay for if you elected to pay would do more harm than good to your actual attempt to learn the language, right? If you've got all these things that you need to practice and you can pay to skip them, it's not like a free-to-play game where you get the points anyway. Like, that just means you haven't practiced them. You're not going to remember the word properly, doesn't it? Like, well, it sort of seems like an interesting, a slightly, I can sort of see why it makes sense, but it does seem like a slightly counterproductive thing to do.
Maybe. I mean, the thing is that, so I've been doing this for 2 weeks now. I actually started on the day after our previous Station 13 recording, so it's been exactly 2 weeks. And basically, I've been doing it every day for about. It asks you when you first start how long you want to study every day: 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So I chose 20 minutes, and it uses that to set the different achievements and objectives that it's giving you.
Right.
So I've just been doing it every day for about 20 to 25 minutes, and I have some very, very basic knowledge of the structure of Swedish and a few sort of simple phrases that I've learnt just from living here. But just with that amount of knowledge, I have amassed a fair quantity of these gems. And as a result, I don't make mistakes that often. Or could also be because I'm practicing every day. And so I haven't yet got to the point where I've run out of health to the point where I need to do something to actually restore. I need to either practice or I need to buy gems.
Right.
So you're right. The balancing, like from a gamification point of view, the balancing of this, I'm not sure whether it's the most effective business model for them as far as helping them make money to keep sustaining this service.
Right.
Obviously, they're getting revenue from ads because you see a lot of ads and you watch a lot of the videos.
Right.
But whether or not that's enough to actually sustain the entire service, I'm not exactly sure. However, I can see that if I was learning a language which was totally foreign to me and I was making a lot of mistakes very, very frequently, the other aspects of the app which are enjoyable and somewhat addicting in a gamified kind of way are enticing to the point that I can see myself putting money into this.
Oh, so these are things other than the ability to pay to skip having to do the practice, right? These are paying money to get extra practice.
That's right. So basically, obviously the other thing that you do when you pay is you remove the ads, which, I enjoy the ads because it gives me a little bit of a break. But, obviously not having ads is even better because you can just keep on getting on with it.
Right.
And if you want to take a break, just take a break.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the idea of sort of paying money to buy gems to restore your health so that you don't have to practice, because practicing is what you're doing normally in the app anyway. The whole thing is basically practicing. Doing extra little practice questions in order to regain health is just more of the same, really.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah, it has a lot of similarities with Memrise. So Memrise is another one of these sort of vocabulary / short phrase oriented language learning apps. It's got an app and it's got a website. And I think Anki is the sort of older one of these. I mean, older even than Anki is another one called Super Memo, which is the first one of this type of app. But that was always fairly niche and only ran on Windows, I think, and it's very old if you look at it. But I think Anki was the first big app to really popularize the use of spaced repetition flashcards as a way to learn languages. And then more recently, things like Memrise and DuoLingo have become popular. And a thing that both Memrise and DuoLingo offer above Anki is they have a much nicer, more fun, more engaging interface. And that's not nothing. Like, I think that counts for quite a lot, because all these little details, the slight tweaks to the way they kind of add a bit of gamification, or even just little sound effects they add in, they draw you in and they make it feel like less of a chore to keep going through grinding through these cards. And Anki can be a little bit dry. So I do actually think that is a legitimate, like, big feature that they have on top of Anki. The big thing that I think Anki offers more perhaps than Memrise and DuoLingo is that it's extremely flexible and extremely powerful.
Right.
And I also think it's a kind of purer model. I don't know exactly the details of how the spacing works in Memrise and DuoLingo's systems, but I think Anki is a very pure sort of spaced repetition system where it's like, this card should be done at this time, and that's when you'll do it, sort of thing. Anyway, so I've been using both. I continue to use Anki, but I've also been using Memrise for a month now. And I use them for different things. So for Anki, I do a relatively small number of what I consider to be very high value cards. And the thing I mean by high value is that it's much closer to using the language. For example, I'll use actual sentences I've taken from a book or a website or a film or something like that. I'll have watched a film, heard something interesting, jotted down the sentence, I'll put that in. Or I might have what's called a closed deletion card, which has a sentence. A thing I've done a little bit of recently, which I found to be quite good, is to take a relatively complex sentence, identify all the verbs in that sentence, and then on the front of the card, I write those verbs in the infinitive form. And on the back of the card, I write the original fully conjugated versions of those verbs. And then when you see the card, based on the context, you've got to look at the verbs, and it tells you what verb it is, and you've got to figure out what conjugation it should be in, and then obviously how to conjugate it into that conjugation. And those types of cards I find to be a little bit more effort per card than the simple vocabulary cards that I have in Memrise. But I think they are practicing multiple skills at once, and they're practicing skills that will be more useful in actual speech. With Memrise, I'm actually at the moment going through a user deck, because one thing that both Memrise and I think DuoLingo offer is they have this large library of decks that have been created by users that can be shared between users, right?
Actually, DuoLingo doesn't offer that, but I'll get into that in a moment.
Okay. And so there's tons of user decks in Memrise. And one that I've found that I've been working through over the last few weeks is called First 5,000 Words of Spanish.
Right.
And what they've done is they've taken a large corpus of Spanish text from various sources, newspapers and films and Wikipedia and things like that. And they've done some analysis, and they've identified the most commonly used 5,000 words. And then they've made a deck of flashcards, and it's just very simple, Spanish to English, or sometimes the other way around, translation, right?
Right.
So the way Memrise tends to work is that you'll have this card, and it's bidirectional. So you'll have this Spanish word and English word, and when you're first learning the card, it will introduce it to you first by going from Spanish to English. And it will start off with multiple choice. And then as you get better, you're just shown the word and you have to type in the answer.
Right.
And then as you get better still, you have to go from English to Spanish rather than Spanish to English.
Right.
And so with this particular deck, it's just vocabulary. It's just individual words, not phrases. And it's just trying to get through this 5,000 as quickly as possible. Or at least that's my aim in doing it. And I consider each of those cards on a per card basis to be extremely low value because I don't think, usually there isn't a direct one-to-one correlation between a word in your target language and in your own language. So it's a little bit contrived to consider them to be the same word, right?
Right.
You kind of need a bit of context to really get the meaning of that word. And that's why I think using actual extracts from books or films is better because you get that context.
Right.
But the reason I'm doing this is because I want to get through it as quickly as possible and build myself a foundation of words that I would kind of recognize, even if I don't perfectly recall them or I don't understand the full nuance of their meaning. When I'm reading a book, which I'm also doing at the moment, I'll see these words, and instead of them being completely new to me, I'll be like, oh yeah, I saw that word the other day on Memrise. What was it again? And that's kind of a reinforcement thing, and then I'm getting this sort of context. I'm almost using it in a similar way to the way that I used Heisig for kanji learning when I first learned Japanese. So I'm treating these first 5,000 words as a foundational thing in the same way that I treated the kanji with Japanese.
So actually, 2 weeks ago, when I was looking at the different options that I had, I actually tried Memrise also. And I found that Memrise, there was no user-created Swedish course.
Yeah, I find that really surprising.
The only course that was available was the official Memrise course.
Right.
And there was one very nice thing about that official Memrise course, which I thought was a definite plus to Memrise compared to DuoLingo. And that was, it has these short video clips of native speakers saying the words.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that
that's
is nice.
Really, really good.
Yeah.
That's really good because, it's a completely different thing to see somebody's face, pronouncing the word. And of course, everybody's accent will be very, very slightly different. And it just somehow feels more real somehow, And that was really, really good, I thought. However, the thing that sort of sold DuoLingo to me was the kind of emphasis on grammar and understanding the structure of sentences, which naturally comes from having to translate whole sentences.
Right.
Whereas, at least with the Memrise, the early stages of the official Swedish course in Memrise, they're just really single phrases and, single words. And yeah, that was the reason why as soon as I started DuoLingo, I thought, oh, well, this is really good. I can... getting a foundation in the way that Swedish sentences are constructed without feeling like I'm actually being taught, but just by looking at them, breaking them down myself, and then being tasked with actually creating sentences and translations on my own.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I haven't tried DuoLingo, so I can't compare them directly, but from what I've used at the official courses on Memrise, it does have that to some extent. It does have... This vocabulary one that I've been doing is a user deck, but the official decks do have full phrases, and they'll be of the sort of length of, for example, one of the phrases in one of the relatively sort of beginner stages of Spanish 4 is, does your daughter want an education? Slightly strange thing to ask, but that's one of the phrases.
Okay.
And so That is like a full sentence, right?
Right.
And the way that you will have to answer that question is not like you're given just a blank sheet and you write it out fully. They have like a palette of words, and that will include and punctuation as well. And that will include all the words and punctuation you need to construct the sentence the way they constructed it. And it may include a couple of red herrings as well.
Yeah, right.
And then you select from that palette and build up the sentence that way.
Yeah, that's the same as the way that DuoLingo works.
All right, okay. So maybe you just didn't get up to the sort of the level that it starts doing that. Like maybe the earlier levels don't do that.
Right. The companion app to DuoLingo is called Tiny Cards. And Tiny Cards is very similar to Memrise. So in the case of Tiny Cards, you have official DuoLingo created decks of flashcards. And you also have user-created flashcards as well.
Right.
And it's much like DuoLingo. It's very sort of cute and it's very fun. It feels like a game as you're doing it. There's a lot of sort of cute little animations and the graphics are really nice. But the great thing is that the courses that you do in DuoLingo, they're all there in Tiny Cards.
And the data, how well you've done, sort of the data about your particular progress is also available, is it?
No, it's not. So they work independently of each other.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
But Tiny Cards is basically, for example, you have like Basics 1 in DuoLingo, and then in Tiny Cards there'll be like a deck called Basics 1, and you basically progress through them, unlocking the next one as you go along. And, Basics 1 will consist of all of the vocabulary from the DuoLingo course. But in the case of Tiny Cards, it's all flashcards, much like Memrise does, where, first you see the English, then you turn it over and then you see the Swedish, and next you'll see the Swedish with multiple choice, and you choose the right English, and then the final level of difficulty will be you'll see the Swedish and you have to type the English, or the other way around. You see the English and you have to type the Swedish.
The Swedish, right. Oh yeah, that sounds very similar.
Yeah, and so that's kind of, I guess that's kind of like DuoLingo's answer to Memrise.
Right.
So yeah, I've found that the combination of these two apps has been really good. And, I certainly wouldn't mind, throwing a little bit of money toward DuoLingo for this service, especially if I'm still doing it after a month and I feel like I'm actually progressing. However, if it's important to anybody, both of these are actually completely free.
Right.
And that was a difference with Memrise, because I think Memrise, the user-created decks are free. However, the official ones, which was the only case with the only option with Swedish, those actually require purchase.
Right. So just to a bit of real-time fact-checking, but I have looked, and there are tons of Swedish user decks in Memrise. So I've sent you the link. So maybe if you get some, obviously you're quite settled into DuoLingo now, but they're there. So if you ever feel like giving it a go, you do need, a thing I have noticed is that it seems to be very limited what you can find from within the app.
Okay.
So it seems like you have to use the browser on a computer to really find all the decks. It seems like a very strange decision. I don't know why they've done that, but you get access to a lot more stuff if you use the browser. So I'll put a link in the show notes for anybody who's interested in Swedish, and I've sent you the link as well.
Thanks.
So for the DuoLingo business model, how does it work? Are you buying individual decks?
No, basically when you start, it asks you what your native language is, and then it asks you which course you want to do. And you have an option of all of the different languages that it has available to it, and there's lots of them. And I choose Swedish, and then it asks you how much do you want to study every day, and then it also, after you've answered that, it will say what do you think your level is, or would you like to take a short placement test so that it could work out what your level is for you. And I just selected absolute beginner. And that's it. And so there was no.
So, but what is the business model? How do they get money?
They get money
apart from ads.
That's it. From ads or from in-app purchases of these gems.
Oh, of the gems.
Yeah.
Okay, which give you access to letting you skip certain types of practice and certain particular types of extra games and things you can play.
Yeah, not really skipping. I wouldn't say skipping practice because, like I said a moment ago, practice is the whole thing. And if you want, to regain health, you're just doing more practice of what you normally would be doing.
Okay.
So by in-app purchase of gems, and the gems gives you certain kinds of functionality that help you do things like continue streaks, or you could sort of unlock a lesson even though you haven't gotten up to it if you wanted to.
Oh, I see.
Or just sort of little extra kind of useful features.
Okay. So with Memrise, it's a slightly different model. It uses a subscription model. And so there's the app is free and the website is free and you can log on. And there's quite a lot you can do for free. You can do all the user decks and also the Memrise official decks. Decks in Memrise are split into chapters. So even within one deck, there'll be a collection of, and it varies between decks, but there might be 25 or 50 or 75 cards in a single chapter. And then you have a number of those chapters, and that makes up a deck. And with the official Memrise decks, you get access to the first chapter of each deck. So you can do the official decks, but you're just getting a much smaller subset of the whole deck. So, if you've got a subscription, you get access to everything, right?
Right.
The other difference when you have a subscription is there are no ads. And actually, I can't remember if there were ads without the subscription. Or I've got a feeling the ads that you get when you don't have a subscription are ads for buying a subscription.
That's right.
It just pops up every now and then saying,
that's right.
Why don't you buy a subscription?
Yeah.
Which can get a bit annoying. But,
that's right.
So there's that. And there's also a number of other styles of cards that you get access to. Styles of sort of almost play. When you've got a subscription, they've got this thing called the Grammati bot, which brings up like a little fake chat window, and it's almost like you're in an instant message thing.
Right.
But from what I've seen of that, it's very sort of scripted. It's like you meet this person and they say hello to you, and then you get this small palette of words to choose from to give your response. And I think there's a little bit of flexibility. Like I don't think it's looking for the exact perfect answer, which would be no different from the translation cards, right?
Right.
But I think it is looking for sort of what is a valid answer to what that person said.
Right.
But I don't know. I didn't find it that satisfying. So I usually skip those ones. They also have a speed review type of exercise, which you can do if you have a subscription, where it's you're racing against the clock. So it's the normal flashcards, but it brings up a flashcard, and you've got this timer counting down. And if the timer reaches 0, you lose a life, and you've got 3 lives, right?
Right.
If you answer the flashcard correctly, then the timer gains a little bit of time. And if you answer it wrong, then you lose a life as well.
I see.
So the idea is that as you're going, you're just constantly trying to beat this countdown timer to prevent it from hitting 0.
Right.
And that I found a little bit stressful. Like I can see how it's a good way to try and do reviews quite quickly if you've got a big pile that you want to get through, because it's got this time element to it. But I didn't need the stress of worrying about this timer. I wanted to be able to sort of answer the cards that I know well very quickly and take a bit of more time to think about the cards that I don't know so well. Right.
I will just put in one small criticism, I guess, of Memrise, which it's entirely a personal thing, and it's definitely probably something that somebody in my profession is more likely to feel looking at Memrise than somebody who doesn't develop games for a living. But the sort of artistic context that's put on Memrise is that, is like this little alien kind of thing, like a pet. And as you progress more through the lessons, you are gradually developing this little alien dude who sort of slowly evolves as you go through it. And there's like these little animations that are playing here and there of like this flower. First you're planting a seed and then a sapling comes up.
Yeah, they've got this weird mixing of metaphors where like your relationship to the cards that you're learning and the information that you've sort of absorbed is, they actually call it the garden. They take the metaphor quite far. If you really go into it, like they really go quite far with this metaphor. So they call your library of cards a garden, and doing exercises is watering the garden. But at the same time, they have this other metaphor going on where going through one of these decks is this rocket ship flying from planet to planet. And each chapter in a deck is like a different planet that you're flying to.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that when I was first trying Memrise, all of that, I guess my sort of knee-jerk reaction to seeing that kind of stuff is I want to understand it. You know, as a game developer, I'm thinking like, what is that? Like, what is it? How do I do that? Like, why is the plant growing? What did I do to make it grow? And like, I'm going to in my rocket ship from this planet to that planet, but can I go there instead? Or like, you know, I just sort of found it all a little bit too distracting somehow.
Right.
On the other hand, DuoLingo, you know, it doesn't disguise itself as anything other than, you know, a game about learning language. But, you know, basically that you have this kind of green owl character, which I guess is the DuoLingo mascot. And that's it. You know, basically you look there and you've got your gems and you've got your sort of 7-day run information or whatever, and then you've got just the lessons, and then you just scroll down and you go through the lessons, and there'll be a sort of like a quiz, and some of them are locked because you haven't gotten up that far, and it just was just very, very clear and easy to understand how this actually works.
Can you buy hats for your owl with gems?
No, you can't.
Oh.
So yeah, I think like all of this kind of thing probably isn't going to bother many other people, but with Memrise, it was just so there was a lot of depth there, and it was very distracting.
Well, there's a lot of stuff. I'm not sure how deep any of it really is.
Right.
The plant growing metaphor kind of works.
Right.
I've grown to like that, because what happens is when you're first learning a new word, you go through like 6 stages of learning when you first encounter a new word. First, it just shows you the word and tells you what it means. And then it shows you the word in your target language, and you've got to select from a number of English definitions and select the next one. And then the reverse and so forth until you get to being shown the word in your own language and having to type it in your target language.
Right.
And each one of these steps, the very first step, you see this little image of a hand placing a seed in a flower pot. And then the next image, you see this little bud sprouting. And then the next image, the plant's grown a little bit. And at the very end, when the word is sort of moved from this learning mode into like its retainment mode, which is where it will spend the rest of its life, that's when the actual flower blooms, right?
Right.
And then from then on, whenever you get to... When you're then revising cards later, right, if you haven't looked at a card for a while and it's thinking this card might be in danger of being forgotten and needs to be practiced in order to retain it, the little flower will show up as a little bit wilted.
Oh, I see.
And then when you answer it correctly, it's got this little animation of a bit of water being poured into it, and then the flower sort of jumps up again and is, you know, nice and colorful and lively. And so... like, it's kind of a silly metaphor, but I kind of think that works. I'm kind of on board with that. Then the whole space thing with your character, Ziggy, who's this alien thing that evolves, like, I don't really see the point in that at all. As far as I can tell, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a way of making a little bit more fun, the transition from one chapter to the next.
Yeah, see, all of that I just found a little bit kind of distracting, because like I said, I wanted to understand, you know, what I'm doing and how do I do these things, and, you know, what options do I have. So that I guess its approach...
You would grow to understand that quite quickly, because there's not actually very much to it.
That's the problem, though. Like, in the first 20 minutes of trying out the app, you know, I'm not thinking about Swedish. I'm thinking about the app itself, and that to me was just a little bit. Maybe that's exactly what would appeal to some people. You know, if you don't actually, if you don't want to learn the language, but you have to for some reason, maybe that level of context would appeal to some people. But to me, you know, I'm using these apps because I really want to learn Swedish, and so I don't mind if the app feels like it's educational. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like they're on a little bit of a sort of spectrum between Anki at the very sort of dry, just black and white text end of the scale, and Memrise at the sort of perhaps slightly over the top animated whiz bang end, and DuoLingo somewhere in between the two.
Yeah,
but I've grown to like it. I quite enjoy Memrise. I will say the big danger with all of these spaced repetition systems, I don't know to what extent this will apply to DuoLingo because you said it asks you how much you want to revise each day.
Right.
But most of the systems that I've learned, that I've used, work more on the basis of these are the cards that represent the sort of knowledge that you're attempting to absorb, right? And much research has been done into when you need to practice this card next in order to retain that knowledge. If you practice it too often, then it's inefficient. It's fine. It's no problem. But you're practicing more than you need to. If you practice it too little, then the chances are high that you will forget that card before the next time you practice it. And so you'll end up going back to square one and having to relearn it. And so that's also inefficient. So the idea is to try and find the sort of most efficient way to do as little revision as possible to gain the most sort of amount of knowledge, right? The best ratio of work to knowledge gained that you can get. And the only real knob that you can control in that context is the number of new cards that you will learn in a particular day. Because the cards that you've already committed to, that you've already sort of taken on and learned and you are now retaining or working to retain, those follow a schedule and you don't have control over that, right? They will follow the schedule that they follow based on how well you recall them.
I see.
But the cards that you introduce per day, you do have control. You can choose, I'm going to learn no new cards, I'm going to learn 20 new cards, I'm going to learn like 200 new cards in a single day. You know, you can, that is a thing that you have absolutely, it's just your choice. And the slight danger there is that there is a real delay between adding a new card and getting the feedback or feeling the effect of having added that card. Because it's cumulative. As you add a new card, you learn it all feels good, and then it gets scheduled for the next day. And then the next day, you add another new card, and you learn that, and that feels good, still feels easy. The card you scheduled the previous day gets scheduled for 2 days hence. And the card you've just learned gets scheduled for the next day, right? So then the next day, it all feels fine. You're still only doing 2 cards. And you learn it, and that's fine. Then that card gets scheduled for the next day. The card that you learned on the first day is now scheduled for the next day. So the following day, you have 2 cards to revise and your new card and so forth, right? So if you learn too many cards at once, about 3 days to a week later, you will suddenly see this explosion in cards that you have to revise. And it takes quite a lot of self-control when things feel easy and you feel sort of motivated, like you want to learn lots of stuff, to stop yourself from just spamming yourself with loads of cards that you're going to have to deal with like a week down the line. And I know this because I'm currently suffering from this. Because, as I said, I was trying to do this 5,000 word deck as quickly as I can.
Right.
It's called a 5,000 word deck, although it's actually only 4,500 words, but still a lot of words, right? Now, from my long experience with Anki, my recommendation for new cards to do per day is about 20 to 30, depending on how simple or complicated the cards are. I think if you introduce about 20 new cards a day over the long term, you won't have to do more than about 20 minutes, half an hour's worth of practice every day. In 2 weeks, I have done all but 300 of these cards. So I've done 4,200 cards in 14 days, which is more than 20 cards a day.
Right. That's one thing. One thing that I've found very impressive about DuoLingo is because it's all sentence based, not single vocabulary card based like Tiny Cards is. It means that it gives them the ability to very, very cleverly use the vocabulary, because you're learning sentences, but those sentences are made up of words,
contain many words.
And,
yes.
One really neat thing about it is that you start with the real basics, then some phrases, and then you have animals and food. And I thought, well, that's kind of a strange, like animals and food. How useful is it to know how to say duck or dog or horse, or to be able to say sausage or, lemon or apple or things like that. I mean, that's not, I'd rather be learning useful phrases with verbs and stuff like that for, things that I do every day in Sweden. However, what I realized that it's actually very clever, because by learning these sentences that contains information about animals and about food, is very easy as you progress through to combine everything that you've learnt in these lessons as you go along. So when you're learning about food, you'll have a sentence like, the horse is eating an apple. And that's when I realized, okay, I see.
Right.
So the reason that you have this after that is so that they can constantly be reminding you of things that you've done up to this point just by the content of the new information that you're getting in this sentence context.
Right.
So there's been many times when, as a previous curriculum designer for English education many, many, many years ago, there's been many times when I've just sort of smiled and nodded and thought, yeah, I see what you guys are doing. That's pretty good. So speaking of revision and education and testing, I actually have another interesting anecdote for you from the Swedish education system.
Yeah.
The kooky, progressive Swedish education system that is often criticized here in Sweden.
And often lauded everywhere else in the world.
Exactly. So on the weekend, we had our neighbour's daughter come over, and she's 14. Mm-hmm. So she is in year 7.
Is she the one that listens to the podcast?
No. That's the dad.
Okay. Different.
That's the dad. That's the dad.
Oh, but it's her dad.
That's right.
Okay. So hello, dad of the person we're just about to talk about.
So she's just about to start year 8.
Right.
So she was telling me a little bit about the testing system at the public school that she goes to. Now, this is a public school, so it's not a fancy private school with some kind of new age progressive education system. This is a regular public school.
Right.
So
okay.
She was telling me about the testing system. So this is really interesting. She said that with their classes, for example, the mathematics class, if they have a test on Monday, they are actually forbidden from studying for the test. And it's actually considered to be cheating to be studying for the test prior to the test beginning. So it's actually, you're not supposed to study.
Right.
And the reason it's done like that is that the teachers want to evaluate regularly. They want to evaluate your actual understanding of what they're teaching you. And, you pass and you fail, so that the grading system is the same based on the test. However, based on the results of what's going on with these tests that you haven't studied for, the teacher will then adjust what they're going to be teaching you next to cater to the general understanding in the class. So if everybody has done very, very poorly in the test without any study, the teacher then is informed that, okay, I didn't do a very good job in explaining this, so we need to go back and review that.
Right.
Or, it could be really, really easy, and then the teacher knows, okay, they all get this, so now we can move on to new things.
Right.
So she told my wife and I this as we were eating lunch, and we just sort of thought, yeah, well, that's it makes complete sense,
Yeah.
Especially, that was very sort of eye-opening from my wife, because of, she went through the Japanese education system. And the Japanese education system, I would say probably it's fair to say it's less about understanding and more about discipline.
Right.
It is the discipline of basically forcing yourself to do something difficult that you don't enjoy and you don't really want to do.
A skill you're going to have to be able to continue throughout your life as a salaryman.
Exactly. And as we know, when it comes to tests, we've all been there, we've all done that. The Australian education system is, pretty regular in that, you have tests and you get graded on that. And, you'll have, of course, you study prior to the test, even if it's just, an hour on the bus in the morning before you get there. The interesting thing about all those tests, and it's definitely the case in Japan as well, is that, you do all of that study, you do all the cramming, or you do the long-term preparation or whatever kind of student you are. And then sure enough, about 3 or 4 hours after you've left the test room, it's all kind of dribbled out your ears.
It's all gone.
It's all gone, which is the reason why it's sort of more focused on the discipline of that rather than actually understanding.
Well, and I mean, I don't know about Japan, but I would say that very similar property exists for tests in the UK and America as well, right? There's definitely a lot of cramming that happens before tests, and it's much more focused on trying to get a high result in your test than necessarily, in theory, you want a deep understanding of what you're doing, but, in practice, I think people are definitely sort of results oriented.
Right.
I think that there's a couple of things there. Number one is it sounds like a difficult thing to police, right? This is mostly an honor system idea where you're assuming the parents are going to be discouraging study and everything as well, because obviously people could be studying in the week running up to the test, right? The other thing is, does this also apply to, do they have something equivalent to, like in the UK would be GCSEs and A-levels, the exams that you do at certain points that aren't your regular sort of check-in exams, but are actual qualifications that you're going to be using to try and get jobs? Because that seems like it feels like you would be hobbling yourself if you weren't allowed to study for something that could affect the rest of your life, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I don't know the bigger picture of the education system and what decides what subjects you can take in university, or the effect of, or how evaluation works on the university level and the graduation level. I don't know. But coming back to the first point there, about, how do you police that? I think the thing is that it's not too difficult, because we're basically talking about teenagers and you give them the choice. Would you rather do nothing or would you rather study? I'm sure, the majority of most teenagers would say, yeah, I'm just going to do nothing. Fine, great.
Right. But I mean, you've also got to have the buy-in from the parents as well, right? Because parents, you're still going to have parents that are pushing their teenagers to do well, right? That's a thing that must exist.
The thing, though, I think, is that if parents understand that the system is not about evaluating your child's ability to understand, but rather just their understanding. I think if most parents understand that, okay, we don't want your children to study, and the reason for that is because we want them to walk into the classroom fresh, with no preparation, and we want to see how much they understand of what we're teaching them in that moment.
Right. Yeah.
Rather than the flip side, which is, okay, here is a test, and we're going to be grading your child,
right,
and evaluating them and
relative
and ranking
to all the other children.
Exactly. Yeah. Based on how well they do on this test. I think even parents who are very driven to encourage their children to do very well on tests for various different reasons, and will encourage their children to study very hard in preparation. I think if it's made clearly understood that this is the reason that we're doing it this way, I think even those parents probably could understand that, well, in that case, they would probably shift their attention on to encouraging the children to really pay attention when the teacher is talking,
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I think I've seen this on TV. I don't know to what extent it's true. Maybe American listeners can back it up or deny it. But I think the American approach to that problem might be random testing. Like you just turn up to class one day and the teacher says, right, we're going to do a test today.
Right.
And that's how they make sure that you haven't prepared, is because they just don't give you the opportunity. Right.
I think, though, the advantage of not having it a surprise like that, but actually having it a system that is understood by everyone, including the students, I think the advantage of that is that it definitely removes that sense of dread from the whole examination process.
Right.
If it doesn't matter if you do very badly on a test, because actually all that's going to do is it's going to have the teacher help you understand again,
right, or
basically clear up things that you didn't understand the first time round. If you understand that that's the reason that you have a test, then students are going to be much less intimidated and much less, loathing of the whole testing process.
Right.
However, if you have a regular system where testing is the evaluation of a student's ability, and you have these sort of random spot quiz kind of surprise tests here and there. You know, I can just imagine this classroom of teenagers groaning when the teacher says, "Right, everybody, we're going to do a test right now."
Yeah.
So I think that this
definitely.
is part of the puzzle. You know, in coming to Sweden, I've often found myself wondering, what is it about the Swedish education system and the Swedish society which seems to be working quite well in producing, you know, some amazing success stories, really. You know, if you think of companies like IKEA, and you think of, you know, web services like Spotify and SoundCloud and, you know, numerous others. Not just Sweden. I mean, if you factor in all of Scandinavia, what is it about the way that they do things that seems to somehow facilitate, you know, these kinds of successful stories that you get from Scandinavia in business? And I'm still figuring it out, and I think it's going to take me, you know, many years to and many experiences to try and figure it out properly. But one or two of the things I have as hypotheses of how this could be working is, I think one important thing is there seems to be a strong emphasis here on children finding their own passions. And, you know, it's an education system that basically gives you the time to do what you want. There's very little homework. The school day is pretty short. For example, for my son, who's 8, or actually 9 in a few days.
Oh, happy birthday!
Yep, he's you know, one half of his day is basically just doing what he wants with the support network of a school, and I can see how, you know, that would come to a situation where there's so little discipline that, in a sense, children learn to self-discipline themselves. Especially when it comes to doing things that they really actually enjoy because they found it themselves, rather than, you know, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this. So it really seems to foster this environment where children can freely find their own passion and then really enthusiastically pursue that passion, because you know, the way the social system is set up is that, you know, after university. It's quite easy to do something freelance, you know, and there is a support network there for you, the government's unemployment system, and, you know, the network is fairly well developed so that you, when you're in your 20s, you can just give it a try, start a business and, you know, follow your passion, see if it works. And if it does, you've got yourself a company. And if it doesn't, you know, you just go and find a job somewhere, you know.
Yeah. I think that one of the very important things increasingly in terms of innovation in these increasingly creative fields that I think, you know, as we move into more sort of software-based industries, and what do they call it? The intelligence economy or something like that. Like, I think more than, say, 100 years ago, where things were a little more industrial, now a lot of innovation and a lot of success comes from somewhat more creative fields. And the key to making that a success is to reduce the cost of failure, because there will be many failures. You can't be creative and have, you know, creative successes without having a lot of creative failures. It's just a sort of inherent part of the process. I think.
And that's when I go to networking events for the Stockholm game community, the game development community, it comes across very, very strongly that this culture and this society and the system that encourages people to do something that they're passionate in, and also gives you the safety net to fail at that, but also gives you the freedom to define that for yourself. It's very, very apparent when you go to these networking events, because you'll meet people who are making games in, you know, small companies in groups of 4 or 5 in their 20s, absolutely smashing it from a commercial point of view, you know, like creating amazing success for themselves, even though they're in their 20s. And when you talk to them, you realize, like, that's passion on a completely different scale from what I've experienced when you see people that have just naturally come to developing games because it's something that they discovered from a very young age that they really liked doing, and they were given the freedom to actually try and experiment and to follow, that passion. Because I think that one thing I can remember from when I was growing up in Australia is that in the 90s especially, there was this kind of pressure to have a dream,
Yeah.
This pressure on young people that, you should be ambitious and you should have a dream and you've got to chase your dreams. And if you wake up in the morning and you're not doing something that you absolutely love, then you need to make changes in your life. And,
I think the fallout from that has been fairly well documented as well. It's quite interesting.
Right. And I can remember myself, it took me a long time to sort of figure out what I wanted to do. And I had the sense that I was inadequate and I was wrong and for not having this dream, and not knowing what I wanted to do was a problem. And that that's not right. What do you mean you don't know what you to do? You don't have it. Everybody has a dream.
Right.
You feel kind of singled out if you don't actually have that.
Right.
And when I observe young people in Sweden who are doing their thing, or people who are the school system as well, as my son goes through it, and I see that people have so much freedom and so much time to just try different things and to see what sticks, basically. I sort of realized that, well, this, if you want people to have dreams, don't just tell them you have to have a dream, chase your dreams. Actually give them the freedom to try and find it for themselves, and they will eventually.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I mean, we could go on for ages about the whole dream thing, because it's definitely like a documented thing that people of our generation and younger, like particularly millennials, they have this constant conflict between, trying to be successful, but also trying to work out what the thing that was what they actually wanted to do was.
Right.
And some people are lucky. Like I was lucky because it was fairly clear to me from quite a young age that I wanted to do programming and I wanted to program games specifically. And I was also lucky because, in the 80s and early 90s, not many parents would have encouraged that. Like, I don't think many parents would recognize the distinction between spending time on the computer playing games and spending time on the computer making them. And so, a lot of people were discouraged from doing that sort of thing and encouraged to go and do more sort of proper jobs, which I think is probably less the case now. But I was lucky in that my parents, I think, did recognize the value in that and encourage that from quite a young age.
Yeah, I was lucky too, because in my case, also similar to what you mentioned just there. In my case, I sort of knew what I enjoyed doing, and I sort of knew what I wanted to do, and it was all based around the Commodore Amiga. And making music on the Commodore Amiga was, this is what I want to do. Or looking at graphics in demos, from demo scene demos on the Amiga, and thinking, I love this design and this the graphics and graphical design and things like that. But of course, as you mentioned there as well, there was definitely, when I was growing up, this idea that if you want to have a stable lifestyle, you don't become a musician. You don't become an artist if you want to have a stable income and a car and a family and and a mortgage.
I mean, they're not wrong.
Yes, that's true. I think in my case it was sort of because my brother was a software engineer. It was sort of a case of really, I kind of know what I want to do, but I can't be that, so I've got to find something else that's viable.
Right.
Well, I'm about to pass out from dehydration, so